So, you've just wrapped up exploring the incredible ways we harness microbes for clinical and industrial use. But today, we're flipping the script. We are diving headfirst into pathogenic microbiology and the immense global burden of infectious disease. As future healthcare professionals, this is exactly where the stakes get incredibly high.
Now, before we get into the darker side of things, let's remember that the microbial world is mostly on our side, right? Take the microorganisms that make up the microbiome in our large intestine, for example. They are absolutely essential for our digestion and immune health. We quite literally couldn't survive without them. However, our clinical focus has to pivot now. We're shifting away from the helpful ones to look at the specialized invaders, the microbes that don't just peacefully coexist with us, but actually invade the body and cause real harm.
Here is our agenda for this explainer, so you can see exactly how we'll map out global epidemiology today. Section 1. Helpful microbes to harmful pathogens. Section 2. The global mortality matrix. Section 3. The global health divide. And finally, Section 4. Neglected tropical diseases.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, helpful microbes to harmful pathogens. From allies to invaders. First things first, what exactly makes a microbe dangerous? Well, our working definition of a pathogen is any specialized microorganism equipped to actively bypass our immune defenses and induce clinical disease. Whether we're talking about a specific bacterium, a virus, a fungus, a protozoan, or a parasitic helminth, what sets this group apart is their active capacity to cause tissue damage. They are literally built with specific mechanisms to survive our body's counterattacks and establish an infection. And get this, what's truly staggering here is the sheer diversity of these threats. Out of the millions and millions of microbial species on Earth, there are only about 1,500 distinct species documented as capable of attacking humans. So it's a relatively small, well, a highly specialized, incredibly dangerous club of human pathogens. But the macro-level damage these 1,500 species can inflict, it's astronomical. Which brings us to Section 2, the global mortality matrix. Let's look at the sheer scale of infectious disease. The global stakes are just staggering. Infectious diseases form a mortality matrix that accounts for an estimated 13 million deaths worldwide every single year. 13 million! Let that sit with you for a second. Despite all our modern clinical advancements, antimicrobials, and hypervigilant hygiene protocols, infectious diseases remain one of the most formidable forces of mortality on the planet. But here's the thing, this burden, it's nowhere near equal. These acute infections violently exploit geographic distribution gaps and systemic healthcare limitations in developing nations. The overwhelming majority of that morbidity and mortality is concentrated precisely where the infrastructure is at its weakest. It's essentially a geographic lottery that dictates whether an infection is a minor inconvenience or a fatal event. Let's move to Section 3, the global health divide. This is really a tale of two completely different systems. To really grasp this epidemiological divide, let's use a conceptual model. Think of a low-income nation's health profile as the vulnerable building. It's an older structure lacking a security fence, water filtration, or basic structural maintenance. Because the perimeter is completely exposed, external infectious intruders can easily reach the walls, overwhelm the system, and cause rapid, catastrophic breakdowns. Now, contrast this with a high-income nation's profile. That acts like the modern fortress. This is a high-security facility with advanced filtration. Here, those same external invaders are largely kept out. So, the modern fortress doesn't usually fall to an outside attack. Instead, it breaks down over long periods due to the slow internal wearing out of its own biological plumbing and wiring. Let's look a little closer at what is breaching that first structure. In that vulnerable, older building, acute infectious processes absolutely dominate the leading causes of death. The intruders successfully scaling the walls include lower respiratory infections, diarrheal illnesses, malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV/AIDS. On top of that, there is a massive, concentrated mortality burden placed specifically on vulnerable neonates. Because the structural defenses are weak, these infections move fast and strike the absolute most defenseless inhabitants first. On the flip side, let's look at what takes down this second structure. The high-security fortress keeps the majority of those acute invaders out, which means mortality is dominated by chronic, non-infectious systemic pathologies. The building fails from within. The leading causes of death here are ischemic heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, and lung cancers. It's the incredibly slow decay of the biological system over decades, rather than a rapid, violent breach by an outside pathogen. Now,
As epidemiologists and future healthcare providers, we have to ask a big question here. Is there a single threat out there capable of bypassing both the vulnerable building's lack of defenses and the modern fortress's high security? Is there an infectious process that just completely ignores geographic and economic boundaries? Actually, yes. And this brilliantly illustrates what we call the respiratory exception. Lower respiratory infections persist as a critical top 10 infectious cause of mortality across both high-income and low-income demographics. It proves that despite our modern fortresses and advanced healthcare systems, the human respiratory tract represents a universal clinical vulnerability. Whether you're standing in an older, vulnerable building or inside a high-security fortress, we all breathe the exact same air, making this a unique and persistent global threat. All right, Section 4, Neglected Tropical Diseases, or NTDs. Let's meet the specific intruders. These specific intruders thrive precisely where a building's infrastructure completely fails. Neglected tropical diseases are a group of communicable diseases heavily clustered in tropical and subtropical environments. They disproportionately target impoverished populations that lack clean water and adequate sanitation. And they're called neglected because they rarely breach the walls of modern high-income fortresses. Because of that, they historically receive far less attention and funding than diseases affecting wealthier nations.
Go ahead and take a screenshot of this matrix because it clinically maps out the staggering epidemiological scope of NTDs. Just look at these numbers. We're talking about Ascariasis, a parasitic roundworm affecting 1 billion individuals globally, Hookworm impacting roughly 700 million, Schistosomiasis burdening 240 million people. And as we move down the list, we see diseases that drastically alter a person's quality of life, like lymphatic filariasis at 51 million cases, and conditions leading to severe visual impairment like Ascariasis or river blindness at nearly 21 million, and Trachoma at 2 million cases in endemic zones. This perfectly visualizes exactly what happens when pathogens are allowed to run rampant through vulnerable populations without those structural healthcare defenses.
So we've seen the staggering numbers, and we've identified the microscopic enemies breaching our defenses. But here's the crazy part. For most of human history, we had absolutely no idea what was actually attacking us. It was a complete mystery. So how did humanity finally learn to see these invisible intruders and build our modern defenses? Keep that question in mind, because in your very next explainer module, we'll be covering the historical foundations of medical microbiology and the germ theory. In that next video, we're going to discover exactly how we learned to spot these microscopic invaders and how we finally began to build the fortress walls of modern medicine. I'll see you there.